They said Merle Haggard's ranch was just land, just dirt, just a quiet place where an old country singer went to rest. But when people finally took a closer look, what they found told a very different story. A story about guilt, about survival, about secrets buried deeper than the soil itself. You know, Merle didn't just write songs about pain. He lived it. And once you understand what that ranch really meant to him, you'll never hear his music the same way again. But listen to this, because the truth starts long before the ranch ever existed. Merle Haggard didn't grow up chasing success. He grew up running from loss. You see, people love to talk about his songs. The honesty, the grit, the pain in his voice. But very few stop to ask where that pain actually came from. Merle was born into struggle, real struggle, the kind that doesn't leave room for dreams. His family was so poor that at one point they lived inside a converted boxcar. No insulation, no comfort, just walls, holding in cold nights and heavy thoughts. And then, life took something from him that never came back. When Merle was only 9 years old, his father died suddenly. A brain hemorrhage, fast, brutal. One day his father was there. The next, he was gone. You know, when a kid loses his father that young, something breaks quietly. Not all at once, but piece by piece. His mother did everything she could, worked nonstop, held the family together. But Merle, he didn't know how to process that kind of loss. So, he turned it inward and then outward. The anger showed up early. Teachers noticed it, neighbors noticed it, the law definitely noticed it. By his teenage years, Merle wasn't just acting out, he was spiraling, shoplifting, breaking rules, running away from reform schools like consequences didn't apply to him. And you see, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about pain looking for a place to land. Every bad decision was a message he didn't know how to say out loud. And the scary part is this. No one stepped in soon enough to stop it. Because this grief, this unresolved anger, was quietly steering him straight toward disaster. And that disaster would come faster than anyone expected. But that's not all. Because the next chapter of his life wouldn't just test him, it would break him. By the time Merle Haggard was in his 20s, the line between bad choices and real consequences disappeared. You know, this wasn't teenage trouble anymore. This was serious. He'd already been in and out of reform schools, already tested the limits, already felt untouchable, until one night, it finally caught up with him. In 1957, Merle was convicted of burglary. No slap on the wrist, no second chance, straight to San Quentin, and so, just like that, freedom was gone. You see, San Quentin wasn't a place that fixed people. It exposed them. Cold concrete, steel doors, long nights with nothing but your thoughts. Merle later admitted that prison didn't scare him at first. What scared him was the silence. The silence made him think about his father, about his mother, about how badly he disappointed her. And that guilt, it ate at him. Solitary confinement didn't help either. Hours alone, days blending together. You know, when you lock a man alone with regret, his mind becomes his worst enemy. Merle watched other inmates sink deeper into violence, into anger, into hopelessness, and part of him wondered, is this who I'm going to become? Because here's the truth. Prison didn't automatically make him better. It almost made him worse. He was angry, ashamed, lost. And if nothing had changed, his story would have ended right there. But listen to this. Something happened inside those walls. Something small, but powerful. One moment that shifted everything. One sound that cut through the noise of prison life and planted a dangerous thought in his mind. What if there was another way out? And that moment would change his life forever. Prison was supposed to erase Merle Haggard. You see, most men who entered San Quentin didn't leave better. They left harder, angrier, more broken. And Merle was heading straight down that path, till one day, something unexpected happened. An announcement echoed through the prison. A concert. Inside San Quentin. Most inmates didn't care. Music wasn't freedom, but Merle went anyway. And that's when he saw him. Johnny Cash, standing there, calm, unafraid, singing directly to men society had thrown away. You know, that moment hit him. Not the fame, not the applause. The way those songs made prisoners feel human again. Merle later said he realized something right then and there. Music wasn't just entertainment. It was survival. It was confession. It was redemption. And so, sitting there in prison blues, Merle started thinking differently. For the first time in his life, he saw a future that didn't end in a cell. He began earning his high school equivalency, started singing for other inmates, quietly, honestly, and listen to this. People listened. Not because he was famous, because he was real. You see, when a man sings about regret while wearing prison clothes, there's nowhere to hide. Those songs came from places he couldn't escape. And that's when the fear changed. Before, he was afraid of the world outside. Now, he was afraid of wasting this second chance. But here's the thing. Deciding to change your life in prison is easy. Doing it on the outside, that's where most men fail. Because when Merle finally walked out of San Quentin in 1960, he didn't walk into success. He walked into rejection, suspicion, closed doors, and the world wasn't waiting for him. It was watching to see if he'd fall again. And trust me, the next chapter proves how close he came. When Merle Haggard walked out of prison, nobody was waiting with open arms. You see, freedom didn't erase his record. It followed him everywhere. Jobs were hard to get. Trust was even harder. So, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He played music, small bars, rough crowds, long nights, and slowly something started to happen. People didn't just hear his songs, they felt them. Because when Merle sang about regret, he wasn't imagining it, he lived it. Then came the breakthrough. Records started selling. Radio picked him up. And just like that, the ex-con became a voice for working people. But listen to this. Success didn't come quietly. It came loud. One song in particular changed everything. Okie from Muskogee. Some people cheered, others were furious. They said Merle was mocking protesters. They said he stood for everything America was fighting over. And so, the labels began. Patriotic hero to some, villain to others. You know, Merle later admitted the truth wasn't simple. The song came from anger, from frustration, from a man who knew what it meant to lose freedom. But the public didn't care about nuance. They wanted a symbol. And Merle was trapped inside one. Here's the part most people miss. That image made him famous, but it also boxed him in. Every word he sang was judged. Every opinion was weaponized. Behind the applause, the pressure was crushing. Because once you become a voice for millions, you lose the right to be confused. And that pressure, it doesn't just fade, it builds. And pretty soon, it starts breaking things inside you. And that is when Merle's life began to unravel again. It gets worse. By the time Merle Haggard had everything people dream about, he was losing the things that mattered most. You know, fame has a funny way of doing that. The hits kept coming, the crowds kept cheering. But behind closed doors, his life was anything but stable. Marriages didn't last. Love turned complicated. And the road never really ended. So, exhaustion set in. When you are expected to be strong every night, you stop admitting when you're tired. That's when the coping starts. Late nights, bad habits, substances that made the noise go quiet. For a while. Not because he wanted to self-destruct, but because he didn't know how to stop feeling everything at once. And listen to this. Even with money, even with success, there were moments when his finances were tight. Touring costs, industry pressure, bad decisions stacking up. You see, success doesn't erase stress. Sometimes it multiplies it. There were years when Merle admitted he felt lost, depressed, trapped inside the image everyone else loved. He wrote songs about middle age, about regret, about feeling worn down. Those weren't concepts, they were confessions. And here's the part that hurts the most. The public didn't notice. They saw a legend. They didn't see a man quietly falling apart. But that's not all. Because instead of giving up, instead of disappearing, Merle did something unexpected. He stopped pretending, he slowed down, he faced his demons, and he returned to the only thing that had ever saved him before. Truthful music, and that decision, set up the final chapter of his life. A chapter that would redefine how people remember him, and trust me. What came next surprised everyone. By the time Merle Haggard slowed down, he didn't run toward the spotlight. He ran away from it. You know, after decades on the road, after prisons, politics, fame, and quiet battles, Merle needed a place that didn't ask anything from him. That place was the ranch. People thought it was just land, wide open space, a luxury purchase. But that's not what it was. To Merle, the ranch wasn't about wealth. It was about control. Out there, no labels told him what to sing. No crowds demanded answers. No one cared about the past. So, he built something simple. A place where time moved slower, where mornings were quiet, where memories had room to breathe. You see, Merle wrote many of his later songs there. Songs about aging, about regret, about finally understanding himself. And listen to this. The ranch became the one place where his past stopped chasing him. No prison walls, no political noise, no expectations, just a man and his thoughts. Neighbors later said he valued privacy more than anything. He didn't want visitors. He didn't want attention. He wanted peace. And that tells you everything. Because when a man who spent his whole life running finally stops, that's where the truth lives. After his passing, the ranch took on new meaning. Not as property, but as a final statement. This was where he healed. This was where he reflected. This was where he laid everything down. And suddenly, people started asking questions. Why this place? Why here? Why did it matter so much to him? And that's when people realized something uncomfortable. The ranch wasn't hiding secrets, it was holding a lifetime of answers. And that understanding changes how his story ends. But before we close it all together, there's one final thought you need to hear. When people ask, what did they find at Merle Haggard's ranch? They expect a secret, a scandal, something shocking. But you see, the real discovery wasn't an object, it was a man finally at peace. Merle Haggard spent his whole life carrying weight. Loss from childhood, guilt from prison, pressure from fame, judgment from people who never walked his road, and that ranch? It wasn't hiding anything. It was where he laid it all down. Out there, he wasn't a symbol, he wasn't a controversy, he wasn't a headline. He was just a man who survived his past and chose honesty over perfection. You know, maybe that's the part that still makes people uncomfortable, because his story reminds us of something simple and hard at the same time. That broken people can still build something meaningful, that mistakes don't cancel truth, and that sometimes the loudest answers are found in quiet places. So before you judge the man, before you label the songs, ask yourself this. Can you separate the life from the legacy? And if not, why does that make you uneasy? If this story made you think, leave a comment below. And if you want more real stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe. Because some legacies don't fade. They wait for us to finally listen.